to you about working effectively with other people, and in particular, people from a different discipline to you. Now, I don't know how you feel about the idea of working with other people in general. If you're the kind of person who quite likes the idea of working in the games industry because you want to work with computers because they're easier to work with than people, well, let me first reassure you, you are not alone in the games industry, including me. So I remember my gap year, which was getting on for 20 years ago. I wasn't working in the industry, I was working in a lab. And the idea of talking to other people about what I was doing, or phoning people I didn't know up, I often had to order supplies for the lab. That brought me out in a cold sweat. It was not an easy thing to do. So, you're not alone. And hopefully, having some advice on how to work with others will make that a little easier for you. But even if the concept of other people doesn't bother you, hopefully you'll find a bit of advice helpful to get a leg up as you go. So, let me give you a bit of context about where I'm from. So Jagex is most known for making RuneScape, which launched in 2001. I work in what's called the RuneScape platform team, so we're responsible for the servers, the client, a lot of the surrounding infrastructure. And that team is, there's 7 of us, 7 people. But the wider RuneScape team, so all the people working directly on the game, is about 125 people. Now, some of those people I very rarely talk to, at least in a professional way. It's not often I have to go and talk to a member of the German translation team or something like that. But I do liaise with QA testers, with tools developers, with designers, producers, even artists sometimes, if something wrong with the graphics engine. A lot with what we call content developers, which is actually quite a broad category, but people who are, making quests, building new bits of RuneScape for people to run around in, making activities, putting dialogue into the game, that kind of thing. And one of the difficulties with talking to people in different disciplines is that often people in different disciplines are talking a different language. So the key question is, how do we work well with others rather than, say, coming to blows, as might happen? So I don't know if you guys have ever had a chance to do some big project work. I hope you have, or you will, with different people doing different roles. And maybe you design something, you've spoken to a coder saying, look, I need a feature that'll do this. And they said, yep, fine, I can do that for you. And they run off and they come back. And what they've produced is not what you expected. There's been some disconnect. They didn't understand what you were after. And you've now got to either live with this feature that isn't quite right or take some time to fix it. Or maybe you were doing the testing and you had trouble convincing the one person in your team who's absolutely convinced everything they do is perfect, and you had trouble convincing them that there was some sort of problem. So how can we do this better? I've been doing this for a decade. I think I'm starting to get the hang of it. So I'm going to share first some general advice on working with other people in general, but then also some specific stuff, how to talk to people in particular disciplines you'll bump into in games development. And working well with others mostly is about communication. And so the first bit of general advice I want to give you is actually talk to people. So email is great, Slack is great, but almost always the best way to communicate with someone is to actually go and talk to them face to face. So maybe we might get a Jira issue come in. So Jira is a project management bit of software that actually track work. A request comes in for us to do something, and we're not quite sure what's being asked, or we need to clarify something. And it's much better just to go to someone and talk to them and ask them than it is to try and have an email chain or a comment thread on the job or something like that. Now, I said if you struggle with the idea of talking to people, you're not alone. The bad news is that it really does make you more effective at working with other people, so you are going to need to give it a go. But the good news is it does get easier. So I mentioned my gap year, and by the end of that year, I've been forced to use the phone a lot to order supplies, and actually by the end of the year, it didn't bother me at all. I was forced to get used to it, and I was. Talking to other people was much easier. Now, this is actually something that Jagex used to be really very bad at, and we're much better at it now. We fixed a lot of problems. But when I first started, the technical teams, like the web systems team, which was in charge of the billing system and the forums and the account creation stuff, they were in an extra secure office inside the office, and you needed an extra thing on your security card to get you in the door. And then the RuneScape engine team, who worked on the very core of the game, there weren't very many of them in those days, they worked in an extra secure office inside the extra secure office, right? You needed another security clearance on your card to get in there. And as you might imagine, communication between the engine team and the content team was not great. The content guys had a lot of difficulty getting the features that they really wanted to develop the game. When I started, I was in web systems. I wasn't actually doing engine work, and I could only get into the first layer of this onion of extra security. And that's been overhauled years ago. That's a long gone. But actually, it took a while for the damage of that to filter out. So when I did end up working on the engine a few years later, somebody in content hadn't been there very long, came to me with a request. He said, I'm using this script command in RuneScript, which is the scripting language that RuneScape is written in. And this doesn't seem to work. Could you have a look? And I dug into the code, and it was a very easy fix. I had to take that and turn it into that. That was literally all I had to change. So we did that, and it built. But I then looked at the Git history of this particular bit of code, how when it most recently changed, and realized it had been like that for years. And I said to this guy, there's no one using this. Is it just broken? And he said, well, I tried it and it didn't work. And I spoke to someone more senior and they said, oh yeah, it's broken. Just don't do it. Just use something else. But because he hadn't been institutionalized by the old days when you couldn't talk to the engine team, he did the sensible thing of wandering over and saying, it's broken, could you fix it? And we did. As soon as we knew it was broken, it was trivial. There we are, it was done. So as I say, we're much better at this stuff now, but not talking to other teams about problems with your game is going to hamper you. And even if you fix that later, the damage might linger for a while. Cool, so do talk to people. It does get easier, but I'm not saying don't write things down. You should do that. So if you've gone and had a chat to someone, it doesn't have to be a formal meeting with an agenda in a meeting room. It could just be at their desk. Once you've done that, writing down what you agreed, what you decided, means everyone's on the same page. If you agreed you would go and do something, if you've got a written reminder that you need to go and do it, that's helpful. If a QA tester is telling me something I've written has got a problem with it, much better for them to write that down so that when I then come to it later, when I'm sort of switching context to do something else, I've got the problem in front of me and I know what the steps are to reproduce it and that kind of thing. So if you want to extract information or exchange information with someone, go and talk to them. If you want to store information so you can get it later, do write it down. So do talk to people. One question, of course, that would be, what kind of way do you want to do that? And it's very important when you're working with other teams that you can build trust, right? You need to know you can depend on them. They need to know they can depend on you. And one key part of that is, if you don't know the answer to something, just say so. You might be asked for an estimate of how long is this thing going to take to build, or is this thing even feasible at all? Can we do it? And it may be that you don't know, in which case, just say so. And you might get pressed for an answer or a deadline. It does sometimes happen. It's not very helpful because, an estimate pulled out of the air or a promise that, yes, we can totally do this and then we can't, doesn't help anybody. We're in a creative industry. By definition, we're always doing something slightly unknown. Exactly how long it will take can be hard to pin down. We might build it and find actually it's not quite as fun as we'd hoped and we need to fix it or overhaul it. That takes more time. And sometimes over a decade in, someone will ask me, how long will feature X take? And I have to say, right now, I don't know. And actually, if you tell an able and competent project manager that, they'll say, great, fine. In that case, we need to do some investigation. They can schedule that in. And actually, at the start of a big project, a lot of the work done will be investigation work to nail down what the unknowns are and whether we can do this thing. So let me give you an example. In October last year, we released old school RuneScape on mobiles. So that is a full port of the game. You can play on your mobile, log into a server, standing right next to someone who's playing on their PC. It's the whole thing. And way back in 2016, the start of the project was one developer for a couple of months, sitting down, trying to work through all the issues and say, well, can we do this at all? Is this going to work? Are we mad? Can we really get the entire PC client running on a phone, different hardware? It runs in Java. That's not, it used to run out of browser, doesn't anymore. It's not an obvious fit. Can we make it work? And once we'd answered that question and we said, yeah, we think it will work, then we could build a team around the whole project and get it done. Now, you may find it quite easy at first, actually, when you get a job to say, I don't know, because no one's going to expect you to know everything day one. There'll be a lot of stuff that everyone knows you've never encountered. You might be joining a project in the middle of making a game. They know you don't know the ins and outs of that. That's fine. But maybe a little while later, you'll start to think, well, maybe I should know by now. Is it okay that I keep saying I don't know? Maybe I should know. But I'd encourage you always to see a situation where you don't know as a learning opportunity, and the place you're working hopefully will support you in working that out. If it's something it'd be good for you to know, they'll support you in finding out. But I'd say always just be honest, say I don't know, don't try and bluff your way through. And I think that's also true in interviews, particularly if you're in a technical discipline. When you go for an interview, people will often ask you a series of technical questions, until they find something you can't answer. And the reason for that partly is that we want to know how far we can take things before we hit the wall of your knowledge and how deep your knowledge goes. But also we want to know how you react when you encounter something where you don't have all the pieces, you don't have the answer. Are you asking sensible questions to get more information? And also, if you really don't know, are you just prepared to say, sorry, we've hit the wall, this is as far as I can go right now as a graduate, I don't know the answer. And that is much better than trying to waffle for 5 minutes and bluff your way through, because we'll see that. So, we should talk to people. This is one of the ways we should do that. When should we talk to people? Well, I would always say, communicate early. So imagine you're asked to deliver a feature for a game that needs to be there in 3 months' time. No one's going to use it before then. And you look at it and you think, well, this is about a week's work for us. We've got some other stuff scheduled in and it builds on something else. So it makes sense for us to start this 3 weeks before it needs to be ready. But imagine you need another team to work on something to support what you're doing. If you go to them with 3 weeks to go and say, oh, by the way, we need you to do this thing, what are you going to do if they say, well, we can, but it'll take us 6 weeks? Or if they say, well, okay, we can, but we've promised these next 3 weeks of work to some other people to do some other stuff. Right, either your stuff's going to have to, get pushed back. Someone else's stuff is going to have to get pushed back if you've got some sort of hard deadline. That's going to be awkward. Or, the team you just dumped this request on is going to have to do overtime, rush something out. It won't be as good as it could have been. None of those are good solutions. And it's going to get even worse if they then say, so how long have you known you're going to need this? And you have to say, actually, we knew 2 months ago. We just didn't tell you. It's not going to go over well. So do communicate early with planning. It might seem quite strange if you think, well, this is probably only a week's work for you, but we're telling you 3 months ahead we need it. That's actually really helpful because everyone can plan it into their schedules. They have visibility on what's expected of them coming up. They can prioritise as needed. It's actually very, very useful. The other time to communicate early is when stuff starts to go wrong. So as I say, we're in a creative industry. There's always going to be some unknowns, even if we do investigation work. Something might take longer than we expect. Maybe a colleague gets ill and has to take 4 weeks off. Maybe the latest patch we've released for something has an issue in it and everyone needs to stop what they're doing and go and fix that before doing anything else. And the earlier you can tell the people who are going to be affected, who are expecting you to deliver some feature that you now can't, at least not on time, the more able they are to plan around that. So imagine that half the platform team, came down with a norovirus outbreak or something, which has never happened. I'm not carrying any plagues, don't worry. But if that happened, then we could go to the people managing the RuneScape content schedule and say to them, look, the stuff we were going to do, it's going to inevitably be pushed back because people are off. They can then look at, well, how can we rearrange the schedule? Can we stop work on this now, pick up something else and bring that forward? Can we release this thing in 2 stages so we don't need the new feature just yet? That'll never be an easy or painless process for them, but and it may mean disappointing the players as well. But the earlier they know, the better they're going to be able to do that. There we go. So I've got one last piece of specific advice, also general advice, which is quite a tricky one, which is be careful how you pitch your jargon. So if you're talking to someone about a technical issue and you're reeling off a load of technical terms and acronyms that they just don't understand, you're not really helping anyone. You're not really communicating anything useful anymore. And hopefully they'll say, well, hang on, I don't quite follow you. But they might be a bit embarrassed. They might just kind of nod and smile and glaze over a bit and kind of pretend everything's fine. And you go away thinking you've explained something and really they haven't taken it in. On the other hand, of course, you don't want to patronise someone and teach them to suck eggs. So you don't want to just spend more time than you have to explaining stuff they already understand. So it's a hard one to get right. I wouldn't stress about it, just something to be aware of. In particular, if you're talking to 1 or 2 people in particular outside your team quite a lot, you'll get to know kind of what they get and what they don't. But it is something to be aware of. And also, if someone's talking to you and reeling off a load of stuff you're not following, stick your hand up and say, I don't know. Again, there it is. And give them a chance to explain it. And if there is some particular aspect of your job that someone needs to understand, just take time to do ask, are you with me on this? Are we on the same page? So there we go. So that's the general stuff. I want to talk about some specific teams you might encounter and how you can talk to them. Obviously, the further you get from server and back-end development, the less advice I've got to give because the less I've done it. But I'll go with what I know. And in fact, I'm going to start with how you could talk to us as server, back-end support infrastructure developers. So, first of all, engine server devs. And the first thing I'd say if you want to come and talk to us is tell us what you want to achieve. So sometimes someone will come to us and say, hey, could you put this new command in RuneScript for us? And we probably can. It's probably not a lot of work. But if we then dig down into what they want to achieve with that, what they want it for, it may be that actually we can do something better. We can give them something which is going to be easier for them to use. We can do something which is easier for us to maintain, maybe both. If we know where they're trying to go with it, that can be beneficial all round. And people do often do this. They do come to you and say, oh, could you just do thing X rather than saying why they want it? And maybe some people are trying to show off that they know all about your stuff. But I think also people often just want to be helpful. And they think, well, rather than coming to you as server devs with a request phrased in my language, it would be helpful if I came and phrased it in your language. Why not do that? That would be helpful. But because we're the ones with our noses in the code, we know the systems, we have a very broad and deep knowledge of the systems, often we're better placed to spot the best solution. So if you come to us with what you want to do, rather than a specific bit of work for us to do, we can come up with the best solution. But you do need to be specific about what you want to achieve. You can't come to us and say, I would like one crafting system, please. That doesn't really work. But if you can come to us and say how the crafting is going to work, what the player is going to be doing, is it something where they just click a button and it works, or is it something where they set something off and it progresses while they're offline? If you tell us these things, then we can work on a system that is going to meet your needs and let you deliver the fun things you want to deliver to the players. On that note, flexibility is good. So maybe if you come to us and say, hey, could you do something that achieves the following things? And we might say, we can, but it turns out that's a lot more work than you might expect. But we could do this thing instead, which gets you 90% of the way there and is much quicker, and you could have it earlier. How about that? And you may say, actually, that's fine, that gets the job done, we'll take that, we get more features earlier, great. But it may be that actually you can't be flexible. This is a core system, it's got to be done a certain way, you've got plenty of reason to believe this is going to be a great feature for the players. So if you do need to push us, then do. Tell us it's important. No, it's really vital that this thing is done in this way. Because, as a server developer, nobody really is paying for what I do. None of the players are paying for anything that I do. What they're paying for is the things that the quests and the assets, the areas of the game, the activities, all the stuff that the content developers make. That's what players actually want. That's what they're paying for. So really, us in our back-end development role, we're there to serve the rest of the company and provide a framework for everyone else to make the stuff that is actually valuable to players. And even if we're at a company that wants to sort of license its tech, that tech is only valuable if it's a framework that lets content developers and so on produce stuff that players want to pay for. So do push us. We're here to, make the game, give you the framework to make the game as best it can be. Cool. The next thing I want to bring up is something I want to apologise in advance for if we do. If you do come to us and say, hey, could you give us this thing? And we say, oh, well, that's going to be hard because of this, and because of this, and because of this, and because of this. We're probably not telling you your idea is rubbish. What we're probably doing is just thinking out loud. Because if we could guarantee that, every bit of software, every system we ever wanted to talk to was always there was no lag on the internet, nothing ever caught fire, players never wandered outside Wi-Fi range, our jobs would be way easier than they are now. But unfortunately, most of our job is actually accounting for, oh, well, this has gone wrong, or this might not be available, or this player might enter something really weird in this box here. And so it's kind of wide into us when you ask us, could you do a thing that we're going to go, okay, right, what could go wrong? What are the things we need to consider? And it's probably not very helpful for us if we just sort of do that out loud in your face on the spot, but it may happen. So do bear with us if we do that, but it's not very helpful when we do. One last thing though, one thing that would be very helpful if you never said to us, because we get a bit jumpy if someone does it, is to ask, could you just do this? You get the odd scare story in the industry of, some people have made a great game and someone senior comes along and says, great game guys, could you put some multiplayer in it? And then they sort of get surprised when they learn that means re-architecting the entire thing from the ground up. And that's not how games work. And that level of not getting it is, well, pretty rare. But you will occasionally encounter someone who thinks that because they can phrase their request in a small number of words, please add multiplayer, please put a man on the moon, that it must be a simple thing to do. So I'm not saying you guys are ever going to do that, but this just makes us slightly jumpy. As soon as it comes out of someone's mouth, we immediately get a bit nervous. So do come to us with a request, but I'm not trying to put you off. Tell us what you're after. Just be prepared that it might take a bit longer than you'd expect, or even longer than we'd expect once we dig into it. So that's us. That's how you can get the most out of us, and how you can approach us. But other teams, who can I talk about? I spend a lot of time talking to QA testers. And just as they're, please never say to us, could you just? There is one phrase you should never, ever, ever say to a QA tester, and it's this, right? If you want to see what it looks like when a QA tester throws a monitor out the window, this is the phrase for you. This is a couple of guys called Jeff Atwood, and John Goddard, Galloway, I'll get their names right, put together this sort of spoof works on my machine certification program. So if you Google that phrase, you'll find their stuff. But much better if you've looked at something someone's reported and you can't spot the problem, much better they say something like, well, I can't reproduce the issue. And if you're a logically minded developer, you might say, but Chris, these two phrases mean exactly the same thing. And they sort of do, but also they communicate very different things. If you reply to a bug report with works on my machine, you're either saying, well, I don't believe you, or it works for me, so I've done my bit, this isn't my problem, please go away. But if you say, I can't reproduce the issue, you're saying, I've had a look, I want to help, I believe it's a real thing, but I need more info before I can get on with spotting the problem and fixing it. So they don't really mean the same thing. And QA can be a pretty thankless task. You can imagine after they hear this a few times, they get very grumpy, and nobody really tends to pay them any notice until something goes wrong. So do be lovely to them. We need them to make great games. So there we go. Never say works on my machine. The other thing to say is that do document stuff. If QA are going to test your feature accurately and well and thoroughly, they're going to need to know what it's supposed to achieve. We're back to communicating what you want to achieve. If they're going to write a test plan that really exercises your feature, they need to know what it's supposed to do. And they're going to need other stuff like, telling them which build they need to run or which content stream they need to be using and that kind of thing. So do write stuff down for them. That will help them enormously. You may also, when talking to QA, come up with the issue of unrelated bugs. So you pushing your feature out, they test it, and then in testing it, they come up with they encounter an issue that's nothing to do with what you've been working on, but they happen to spot it in a similar place. And it's possible they may then send your work back saying, oh, it's broken, but what they've spotted is a pre-existing problem that's nothing to do with it. Now, obviously, you might be able to spot that as a content developer or a server developer, but QA testers often aren't in a position to know that because they see the game really as a black box. So they can't make that call. So the first thing to say is don't get annoyed at QA if they do this, because they've achieved success. They have found a problem with the game and they have reported it. That's what they're supposed to do. But if you are finding this happening regularly, it can be worth having a system where they ping you an email or Slack, and this might be a case when that's the best format rather than talking to you, because it means you can sort of park it for when you've got a bit of headspace for it. And they can say, well, is this related, or is this something else? And if you can then make the call and say, oh no, that's definitely nothing to do with what we've changed, please log that as a separate issue, we'll deal with it later. But unless this unrelated issue is preventing them testing the new thing, they can pass that through, and you haven't got stuff held up by something that's unrelated. Those are both quite technical roles. Probably the least technical people I speak to regularly are producers or product owners. I mean, these are titles that mean slightly different things in different places. They're a little bit interchangeable. What I'm talking about are people in charge of organising and prioritising work, people in charge of scheduling work, the people who ultimately, as far as the rest of the company is concerned, are responsible for delivering whatever your team is doing. And so if you're talking to them, you're probably helping them plan. And this is a great time to crack out the things I was talking about before. If you don't know how long something's going to take, tell them. They can take that on board. Communicate early, communicate issues if things are going to take longer than expected, so they can then arrange their schedules appropriately. But the other great thing is that these guys can often help you work with other teams. So if you need someone in another team to do something, it may well be that the process is that you tell your producer, we need this to happen. They talk to the other team's producer and say, oh, we need to schedule this in so it happens at the right time. They might then get someone from your team and someone from their team to have a chat to make sure that all the information has been communicated. But all the scheduling will probably happen at their level. So you can get them on board to help make sure that the stuff you need done by other teams gets done. Now, there's one last group I want to talk about, and actually who that group is going to depend on who you are and what work you do. So there'll always be a group of people you serve directly, the people who are the immediate consumers of whatever it is you do, and that's going to vary by role. So for me, it's the content developers at Jagex. I produce a new engine feature. They're my customers, they're my clients in a way. They are using the stuff I've done. But it might be that actually you're really the customers for you, the clients for you are the players themselves directly. But whoever it is using your stuff, if you want to work effectively for them, the one key piece of advice is feel their pain. And what I mean by that is there's always going to be something about their role, what they're doing, which is harder than it should be, takes longer than it ought to. Because it's complicated, it's likely to produce bugs, whatever it is. And like I say, no one pays for what I do. I'm here to serve, in this case, the content developers and make their lives easier. And so I need to hear from them what's difficult, what could be fixed, what could be better. And even better, if I can, I need to feel that and experience it. So when we take on a new server developer in the RuneScript team, we get them to go on a condensed version of the content training course. So they use, RuneScript that we supply to them, so they can see how it works. They can see how everybody else in the team is using it on a daily basis. And some of the sort of apparently quite small but impactful changes made to RuneScript over the years have been done because an engine developer did some stuff in content and went, this sucks, let me make this easier for you. And so if you want to work well with others, use your role to make their role easier. That's what you're there for. It's nice to see when it works, you've made someone else's day better, which is great. And if you can nail that, you will find working with others much more satisfying and much more enjoyable. So those are my top tips. We have perhaps a little bit of time if anyone has any questions. Yes?
I think that at Jagex you've got quite a unique situation where you're almost working on the same game but with old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3. It's sort of the same game but in two separate scenarios.
Sure.
What is the team dynamic like between the two? Do they work together?
So they're on separate code bases, which is something we're trying to rectify over time. So the way, if anyone doesn't know, the way old school worked is in 2013, we found a backup tape from 2007, which had all the old content on it. And players had been sort of saying, we kind of like the 07 era. It was kind of what we think is the golden age. So we sort of realized, we can launch the old version and see if people like it, and they did. And so the code is, our starting point was, rewinding 6 years from stuff we'd progressed. So a lot of it is still different. So they're working on a slightly different version of everything, a different version of the scripting engine, a different graphics engine and that kind of thing. So they work quite separately. There's a lot of commonality between them. But the old school team are sort of an island with themselves. Even the lore of the two games has diverged, so they don't sort of communicate on where they want to take the game sort of plot-wise. So we as the engine team support both of them, where we're unifying the engine. That's helpful for reducing our maintenance overhead, but they do kind of do their own thing sort of in parallel. Hey, yeah.
So often I find that when working in a project, particularly in university, you find that when working with others, you say, I need this, and there's always another excuse, I'll do it now, and it ends up not getting done, getting done really late. How do you kind of, even if you just like bring it up, how do you kind of navigate that?
Yes, it's it can be said that university courses often get you to work together and then don't really support you if it doesn't work very well. And you may get someone who's kind of just phoning it in and doesn't really want to pull their weight. Which, you may occasionally encounter that in industry. Someone who's just turning up for the paycheck and isn't really working. Obviously, in that case, you can sort of raise things with managers and so on. In terms of project work, I actually did an engineering degree, so I didn't really have this experience, actually. I didn't do games development until I got to Jagex. So I don't think I'll have any great wisdom to share, but I do know that it's, I know it's a problem. I'm afraid I can't really give you any quick fixes, I'm afraid. But I think, I think we're being told that's time. But I'll be back by the cafe, so if anyone's asked me any more questions, then please do. Thank you for your time.